Does it look zoomed in at all?
No, it's just not, yeah, it looks fine. Looks
Okay.
fine. Yeah, you just put it on presentation mode, looks good. All right, it looks like it's about that time, so let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the April Auburn Planning Commission meeting. At this time, I'd like to get the meeting started, and so I'll open the meeting and ask Amber if she would give us a roll call, please.
Wendy Birmingham.
Here.
Robin Bridges. Robin?
Hey, I'm here, sorry.
There she is.
Thank you. Phil Chancellor.
Here.
Jana Jager.
Here.
Mac Lazenby.
Here.
Marcus Marshall.
Here.
Warren McCord.
Here.
Nanette Reese.
Here.
Bob Reitenbaugh.
Here.
All right, before we get started, I'd just like to give public a brief overview of our process for this commission meeting. We're going to be presented with agenda items by the city planning department, and then if there is a representative present, they'll be able to have an opportunity to make any kind of comments that they wish before we go into a public hearing if it's appropriate, because we don't have a public hearing on every item. Some we do not. And this will be during the public hearing is going to be your opportunity to address the commission about the agenda at hand. So we want everybody to be heard, but we ask that you keep your comments to 5 minutes, and please keep your comments relevant to the case at hand. Once everyone has spoken, I'm going to close the public hearing, and either the representative and staff will then have an opportunity to answer any questions or respond to issues that were brought up during the hearing of the public hearing. And then we will open the floor to the commissioners for motions, discussion, and a vote. The commission is going to vote based on state and local laws. We're also going to consider the city's comprehensive plan 2030 and the general good of the community. Having summarized the basic hearing process, I want to get a little more specific on our responsibility as it's related to subdivision plats, because we do have a number of those tonight. By Alabama statute, a municipal planning commission such as ours is the final approval authority for the subdivision plats. With regards to these subdivision plats, the commission acts as an administrative body and is bound by limitations that are contained in state laws, the city zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations that this commission has previously adopted. While public hearings are required on the preliminary plats, and we welcome any and all comments concerning these items, please understand that the commission's authority is strictly limited to confirming that the plat meets or exceeds specific requirements that have been codified in laws and the regulations that I previously mentioned. Since we are on Zoom one more time, the basic procedure is once we open the public hearing, I'll be able to if you raise your hand, you'll have a means of raising your hand electronically, and then once you raise your hand, I will turn on your microphone and ask you to speak. Finally, I want to kind of make a specific point. As you know, the Planning Commission is except for subdivision plats, the Planning Commission is only an advisory body for the City Council. And we're charged, and so we make the final decision on subdivisions. However, we do not make final decisions on any of the other items that we'll be addressing. Those are made later by the City Council. So if there are things that you're interested in at the Planning Commission, you'll have another chance to voice your opinion at the City Council for those items. Before we get started, I'll make note of the fact that we have at the applicants have withdrawn 2 different items from the agenda tonight. So I want to mention those because we're not going to have any further action on those items. So one is a part of the consent agenda. It is the Camden South final plat approval, PL 2021-00177. So that's been withdrawn and we will not hear that tonight. And the other item is item number 10 on the agenda, the landings at Academy Drive. This is PL 2021-00110. It's a preliminary plat approval. So neither of those will be addressed any further tonight. Okay, so the first item of business is citizens communication. At this time, if there's, during citizens communications, we're looking for any comments from the public that are interested in talking about anything on the consent agenda. And we have 3 items there. We have minute approval for our last meeting minutes. And then we have 2 annexations, the painter annexation and the boat right annexation. In addition to, if you want to speak about the consent agenda, the other thing would be anything that you have to talk about that has nothing to do with our agenda tonight. So those are the 2 kind of categories. So I'll ask first if there's anybody that would like to speak during citizens communication. And I'll look for your electronic hand. Okay. Seeing none, we're going to proceed. There's no old business at this time, and we'll move into the consent agenda. The consent agenda tonight consists of the approval of packet meeting minutes from the 8th of March and the regular meeting minutes from the 11th of March. And then there's the painter annexation, which is a recommendation to the City Council for annexation of approximately 33.47 acres. And this is PL 2021-00168. And the other item that's on the consent agenda is the boat right annexation, which is PL 2021-00169. And that is a recommendation to the City Council for the annexation of approximately 1.76 acres. Does staff have any comments on these?
Mr. Chairman, I'd recommend approval of the consent agenda, including the minutes as you've outlined and the 3 items as previously discussed.
Okay, have a motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion by the council, the commission? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Okay, motion carries. On to new business. The first item of new business is relates to the zoning ordinance amendment. This is PL 2021-00174. And this has to do with, we're going to be adding new language to the downtown design standards. Ms. Robinson, are you the one for this one tonight? Or no, it's Mr. Kipp or Mr. Howell. Who's going to speak on that? If you're speaking, you are on mute.
Nah, you should be able to hear us. Sorry about that.
Okay, Mr. Kipp, thank you.
Yes, sir. This is, as you mentioned, a text amendment request that would go into the zoning ordinance, amending existing text and adding lots of new text relating to downtown design standards in the UN districts, the urban core, and CEOD zoning districts. By way of background, we've been kind of working on this since probably early 2020. But prior to that, just kind of to give everyone a refresher on all that's happened in the downtown area, because it has been a lot of changes. About every 2 years, there's a new amendment or things change here or there about every 2 years. So in 2006, the Urban Core Task Force was created and developed the CEOD overlays, and that's kind of where the first standards came from for glazing, cladding, things like that. In 2009, the Downtown Study Committee was commissioned to review those standards again. In 2014, marked kind of the first private dormitory, 160 Ross. And that's kind of been a major turning point for kind of the urban area and student housing and purpose-built student housing, and trying to tackle the design issues related to student housing. From 2013 to 2014, the Downtown Master Plan work effort began and was finally adopted in 2016. And that created those UN urban neighborhood districts. We had the first moratorium on purpose-built student housing in 2015. The DDRC was then created in 2018 and really tasked with 2 objectives, and that's kind of where we're on the end of the timeline here now, that of the 2 objectives that they were tasked with accomplishing, the first was to create new development standards, a new and updated design guidelines and zoning ordinance, requirements for new development in the downtown area. And the second being to just review new developments in the urban core. So they have handled probably about a dozen new development reviews in the urban core and surrounding areas, and kind of based on that, their experience with that, the DDRC, which consists of residents that are architects and kind of technical experts on design. We've had these work sessions with them. We met a total of 5 times to kind of hear their thoughts on what constituted a good design, or what other cities might do using their experience to base those recommendations on. And so staff worked with the DDRC, and over the course of those 5 work sessions, we developed what we felt was a good kind of baseline recommendation and language that we felt captured the intent of what the DDRC wanted to see. We then had, as you know, we had 3 joint work sessions with the DDRC and Planning Commission. Kind of in between there, we also met with city staff, other architects, both locally and regional, and civil engineers to kind of really narrow everything out and clean it up and avoid any obstacles. And really what we feel is a very sound list of recommendations. So I'll just kind of run through this, and if you haven't, and mostly for the benefit of the public, since this is the first public hearing associated with this, I will try and be as thorough as I can, but also hopefully not take up too much time. There's a definition section we're proposing to add, and again, this is all this text that you're seeing tonight would be amendments to the zoning ordinance. So we're recommending some new definitions, and you'll see these definitions appear as we go through. To kind of orientate how this would play out, you have urban core shown here, the CEOD overlay, University Neighborhood West, Urban Neighborhood East, and Urban Neighborhood South. And you'll see that we, just for presentation purposes, we're kind of breaking those up into areas where some of the code applies in A, some of it applies to B, and some of it applies to C. This is a good summary table to kind of highlight and consolidate all of these requirements into one spot. We'll go through kind of each one individually, but in the A areas, there is a minimum ground story height of either 18 feet for non-residential uses or mixed uses if it's ground story residential and commercial in one, required storyline, at least on the exterior, to look at 18 feet. Residential uses at 15 feet. And then as you move, it's likewise for the B areas. When you move into the C areas, which is UNW west of North Donahue, UNE east of Ross Street, North and South Ross Street, and urban neighborhood south, there's just a minimum ground story of 15 feet. In the fenestration, you can kind of see it is essentially tiered. In the A area, required 50% for ground story, the B area 40%, and in the C area 30%. On the second story, 30% in those A areas, 30% in the B areas, and 20% in the C areas. And on all three, the upper stories, so second and above, 20%. Yeah, third and above, I should say, 20%. There in the previous regulations, there were required ground story residential or ground story commercial uses. We have looked at that and realized that in some areas that may not be feasible. So we're proposing to go away from requiring ground story resident or ground story commercial, excuse me, and moving into requiring an active use. We feel that this achieves the same type of goal of activating street frontages, of having more pedestrian activity, but not necessarily forcing commercial where it may not be feasible. Ground story residential, we're proposing that it be permitted, where previously you could not have residential uses at the ground story. So that's a major change, and we feel the way that we'll be proposing it would encourage activated street frontages as well. Parking lot screening, we are looking at, we're just revising. There in the previous regulations, there were required cladding requirements and various aesthetic elements to it. And we've really honed in on that, and which you'll see as we move forward with this. And same thing for parking lot screening for surface parking. And as we move into functional entrances, trying to encourage more entrances as you go across the street. So that's just an overview of everything. And we can always go back and forth as we need to look at this. But this slide shows the ground story minimum height of 18 feet, with upper stories requiring 10.5 feet. And that is for those A and B areas. If there is a mixture of uses in the A or B areas, they're required to have a storyline, visible storyline of 18 feet, as we discussed at Packet. We're proposing a maximum building length, and this is at the street frontage, the maximum length of the structure, essentially. So here you have the hub is approximately 500 feet street frontage of a building mass. The kind of blocked out area is the area that would be essentially over that 240 feet. And this is to encourage the buildings to be broken up, so that you don't necessarily have one long building, a 500-foot long building as you go down the street, essentially. We would allow connections between buildings if there was a desire to do that. Those connections could be kind of breezeways, stairways, crosswalks, those types of things that you see in other cities. Auburn does not have any currently, but as we continue to expand, it may be a type of development we may see more frequently. And the requirements for those types of connections would be that they must be at least 30 feet setback from the street or from the property line. The width of such connections is not to exceed 25 feet per level. So you could potentially have multi-level connections like this. And it must be either transparent with fenestration and glazing or open. To try and, but essentially it achieves the same goal as having buildings, a max building length to separate the buildings. So instead, as you're walking along the street, you are able to kind of see through it rather than having just a wall facing you. There's a proposed articulation in building height. So for buildings, and you'll see this theme throughout a lot of this, that buildings that are less than 100 feet in length at the street frontage are exempt from a lot of the requirements. For the same reason I just mentioned, if you have a building that's only 100 feet in width at the street, it's already to scale for the most part. Whereas you have a 500-foot building along the street, it's not necessarily to the right and appropriate scale. So to further that objective, we're proposing a roofline articulation where essentially at the top of the roof, you have to have some amount of undulation. And that could be the total amount of the roof with using different roof types. On a corner lot, it could be expanding or extending the roof line upwards or downwards, or it could be providing a parapet or some other type of architectural detail that varies that roof line, essentially to avoid just a long flat roof. In a similar vein, there is a proposal to require undulations going inward and outward from the front of the building plane, as you see in the examples here, as well as forecourts, which are essentially just recessed areas that would have additional entrances or could have open space or amenity space, those types of uses. There is a proposed requirement to require entrances at a given separation distance. Essentially, what you see here is between this point and this point is approximately 185 feet with no way to access the building, essentially. So you're not achieving that kind of activation of the street frontage. You're not achieving interaction with the public or the building or the tenants. So to try and encourage that, we're proposing a maximum spacing between functional entrances of 75 feet, where at least every 75 feet you would need to have, or within that 75 foot range, you need to have an entrance. Different from the max building length, there's a proposed max facade length. And that facade length is essentially all the materials, fenestration, the bay configuration, the really everything that makes up the facade on the wall front. That pattern should not be more than 100 feet long at the street frontage. So here you have the hub that essentially has three different facades, but it's a 500-foot long building. So only the first facade would really meet that requirement. Facades 2 and 3 would be much too long of the same facade. Moving into fenestration, there is two new requirements. One is the maximum bulkhead, and that bulkhead is essentially the area from the ground to the first level of fenestration, no more than 4 feet for that spacing. And on the opposite side, a spandrel width no more than 8 feet. No more than 6 feet. That would essentially be the space between the second floor line and the first level of fenestration. And this is the text portion of it, but I'll go ahead and move into the image. The current requirements in the urban core and urban neighborhoods is that there be a 30% fenestration on the ground story. That's just the glazing requirement, and 20% on the upper levels. What we're proposing is a tiered approach where in those A areas, we would be going from 30% to 50% on the ground story, from 20% to 30% on the second story, and 20% for the other remaining levels, if there are any. In those B areas, going from 30% to 40% for the ground story, 20% to 30% on the second story, and 20% as you go up. And no change on those C areas. In terms of cladding and appropriate materials, the current regulations are very much the same as this, but there are some prohibited materials listed. The DERC felt that by explicitly prohibiting materials was counterproductive and doesn't allow any degree of flexibility. So we've removed prohibited materials, but there is kind of a baseline materials listed that, that could be the go-to if anyone's ever in doubt, essentially. And as I mentioned, I think in the beginning, the current requirements list that there's required commercial uses at ground story levels in certain zoning districts. We're proposing to step away from that and instead require what we're calling active uses. And when we met with kind of the other architecture groups and the DDRC, this active use language is very common in other municipalities as well. It's a little bit foreign to us, but we think it's a good alternative to requiring specifically commercial uses where it may not make sense to do that. These active uses could be office space, could be restaurants, could be retail, could be amenity space, and it could also include ground story residential units. In those A areas, we're proposing that no more than 50% of that area be dedicated to amenity spaces. And you'll see this currently downtown in a lot of the student developments. The ground floor is entirely devoted to either study rooms or the leasing office or game rooms, computer rooms, lounges, etc. And those types of uses, while they are in a way active uses, they don't encourage the same type of interaction with the public. They're really more intended for the tenants of the building. So we wanted to provide a little bit of flexibility there, but also still meet the intent of that activated use of the, activated street frontages. And essentially no more than 30% of any street facade can be dedicated to garages, blank walls, or mechanical rooms. That's just to limit having a unnecessary amount of mechanical equipment right on the street frontage. On corner lots, these type of non-residential uses should be located on the corner. Like here's the bank located here is a good example of trying to locate that on the corner for the better visibility. And a pretty big change to the current regulations is that we're proposing to allow residential uses on the ground story in the downtown area. We kind of envision this as being like the row houses that you might see in more urban environments or townhome type development, where it could be that these might be individual units, and as you walk up, this could be an internally accessed apartments above it. Alternatively, this could be one unit and this could be another unit. There's lots of different ways to kind of break it up. But the goal is to allow some type of residential use that still achieves that interaction with the public and the private, essentially, as opposed to just all windows, all private space. So these ground story residential use would mimic a lot of the requirements that you see in a townhome style development, with a minimum unit width of 18 feet, a maximum unit width of 50 feet, a little bit of a setback as what you might see in other types of development, just a 5-foot setback. And that's to allow these, if there were a need to have stairways or other types of, closed off private areas for the tenants. The one important thing to mention is that in those A areas, we are still restricting the amount of ground story residential to 30%. That requirement can be waived by the planning director, but there are also some areas that this type of use would not be allowed at all. And this map here kind of shows that, but essentially in all this area here, you could have up to 30% ground story residential, except the areas that are marked out with the dashed red line. Those areas that are dashed out prohibit ground story residential. Here's just a diagram kind of showing what those might look like as they develop. I think we'll see an interest in these, and it'll be interesting to work with developments as they come in and see how this plays out if it's approved. Moving into parking, essentially you have 3 tiers of parking requirements. The first tier is in those A areas and B areas, and that's for structured parking. Essentially, you would be required to have a 15-foot setback from parking, where the first space in the parking structure would have to be at least 15 feet away from the street level. The upper stories would need to be screened using a facade composition, so it would need to either look like a building or have types of opening and material and cladding that would be appropriate for a downtown environment. In the C areas, they would be allowed to look essentially like a parking garage, just would not be permitted to have sloped ramps visible from the exterior. And in the surface parking is still allowed. It just needs to be screened using the wrought iron and clad fence option and landscaping. This is the text for those screening requirements. And the text for screening, surface parking screening. Additionally, any deviation from these requirements would be reviewed by the Planning Commission as a waiver. So that is one element that was requested to be added, and they have referred to legal, and they have reviewed this language and that it meets the requirements. There was some discussion about, and I'll jump to this real quick before we go back, but I know we had a lot of talk about alleyways, and that is something we're still interested in pursuing. But we felt that at this current time and with this particular zoning amendment, it's probably better to develop a plan for alleyways specifically, rather than trying to prescriptively say that you have to have an alleyway every 50 feet or every 200 feet. So we're proposing to come back to this and identify, where those connections could happen, try and come up with a detail or a standard of what those types of alleyways need to look like as far as lighting, as far as public safety, when it should be closed or open to the public, those types of questions. And also the topography and the feasibility of where those alleyways might occur. So that's something to come. So I didn't want anyone to think that we don't want to address this. It's a very important issue, and connectivity is a very important issue. But it's just not the appropriate place in the zoning ordinance, we feel. So that's pretty much everything I have for this so far. At the packet meeting, there was a question about adjusting the parking requirements in the CEOD. The CEOD currently requires 1.5 parking spaces per unit, whereas other zoning districts in the urban area require 1.1 space per bedroom. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there.
It's a little different in the urban core.
Right.
It's 1 per bedroom.
1 per bedroom in the urban core. So we were asked to come up with some language and this is that language that where basically 1 bedrooms and studios in the CEOD would only be required to provide 1 parking space. Anything more than 1 bedroom would have to have 1.5 space per unit. So that was just for y'all's consideration. If you decide to move forward with this proposal, that would be an amendment you could make to the request.
So
Lonnie?
do we need to have a motion and a second? And then if I would like to make that amendment, make it at that point?
Yeah. That's the way we should proceed.
Okay.
But
So
let's have
we need to make a motion before we discuss, correct?
right. So, but I need a public hearing first. So,
Okay, thank you.
okay. Thanks, Logan. So this requires a public hearing. And so at this time, I'm going to open the public hearing. And I ask if you are interested in speaking, that you raise your electronic hand and I will turn on your microphone. So the public hearing is now open for the zoning ordinance amendment. Okay, Mr. Brett Basquin, go ahead and turn on that microphone.
All right. All right. I'm unmuted here, aren't I?
Yes, sir.
All right. Hey, Brett Basquin, 2128 Moores Mill Road. Just wanted to speak on behalf of a few of the concerns I have on some of the changes. When we're talking about trying to introduce more articulation into the front of these buildings and activating the streets, the current regulations stipulate that there's a maximum of a 10-foot building setback. And so I feel like if we're trying to encourage articulation in the front building facade as well as activate these streets, only 10-foot setback may limit some areas. I would like to see if we could add some language in there that would give the planning director some discretion to exceed the 10-foot building setback in the event that they're providing additional activation, street activation from the site. I'm afraid having a hard 0 to 10-foot max may limit the amount of activation we're trying to do or trying to encourage with these regulations. In regards to functional entrances, I understand the intent of the functional entrances, but there are building codes requirements that require 60% of all entrances to be ADA accessible. If you know the different parts of downtown, from Toomer's Corner down to Glen, there's a significant grade change. Same thing if you're going down Magnolia and even parts of Glen. And so my concern there is we may be encouraging stairs and ramps on the exterior buildings that may not technically really need to be there because we're trying to meet a threshold of having a functional entrance every 75 feet. I did see that there's language in there that says at the very end, if planning director can waive, but is the planning director can waive for the 75 feet in certain situations for that whole text, or is it just for the last sentence of that text in the functional entrance section? So that's another question I have. Another thing that came up is in the building massing section, we're talking about structure height and we're talking about parapets, and we're limiting the heights of parapets to 4 to 6 feet within that code. You know, my point is part of the regulations are trying to get that facade to go up and down and get movement and articulation. And if we're limiting the facade to only 4 to 6 feet, we're going to want some form of a facade to help screen the roofs of these buildings. It may be worth increasing the parapet height to 8 foot so that you can get a little bit more movement in the vertical plane on those parapets and have a little bit more separation. Because right now you're probably only going to have about 2 feet to play with if you're still trying to form some form of a parapet there. So I would like ask for you to consider that as well. And then last but not least, the maximum building length. I understand the point of where we have regulations that limit the amount or that limit the length of facade lengths and moving it back and forth. I think Logan did a pretty good job of explaining that in the presentation. But I still think, you know, limiting back building lengths to 200 feet, 240 feet is an unintended consequence of these regulations pigeonholed to purpose-built student housing. I think if we start getting into office buildings and other types of uses in an urban setting, the 240 feet is going to create a lot of issues. So I'm not in favor of having a maximum building length, but I am in favor of the articulating the front facade and changing materials and moving it in and out. I just think, you know, if you're walking by a building and you're wanting to see in a courtyard every 240 feet, I think that if you want the ability to do that, then you probably should buy the property to be able to do that yourself. So those are my inputs overall. I think these changes are great. I think that they'll give designers more direction and ultimately, hopefully give the city a better product. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing no one, I will close the public hearing at this time. Okay, so can you maybe address a couple of those, Logan? I got 4 different things that Mr. Bass was talking about. Let's see, we're talking, the first one had to do with related to more articulation and related to a maximum of 10-foot setback. And currently it sounds like, you know, the way the language was in there, that there is some planning director discretion on adjusting that. So can you kind of?
Sure. So in relation to the 10-foot setback, Brett is right. There is a maximum 10-foot setback in the urban core. We did have a little chat about it this week, and the forecourt language that you see here would allow a building to go past that, to be set back further than that 10 feet. No more than 30% of the building, no more than 30% of the street frontage or of the building length on the street frontage could do that. But it could go back much further than 10 feet. We didn't specify a max, an additional max for forecourts, but that was intentional. I think that answered the first question.
So does that mean that you said there's max, but what, you know, if there's a need to adjust that, that can be done, you know, as with the planning director's discretion? It's not like, you know, sometimes, you know, they sounded like there was a couple of examples there that he mentioned that, you know, you might want to consider having a little more.
Or additional amenities.
Yeah, like I said, for the forecourts, they could go back further than 10 feet.
Correct. And I think that was Brett's question. If they're adding additional street activation space, they can extend that back further. And I think this forecourt accomplishes that if they're doing it for purposes of additional amenity space or additional entrances into the buildings.
Okay. All right. And then the second one I heard was about functional entrances and the relation to, you know, requirements for having a number of, you know, so there's a requirement that says, I guess you said 60%, I can't remember 60% of what, but it said 60% had to be ADA accessible required, but that may be there may turn into an issue where there's not necessarily a need for that. And how can we adjust for it if we find we're putting in, ramps that don't necessarily need to be there? It says the planning director can waive that too, it sounds like.
That's correct, and that would be for the entire requirement. It's not, this requirement is not proposed as a requirement in those C districts, only in the A and B areas that you saw on the map. And where this came from, we originally had this language in here at 50 feet. We saw how this distance of 45 feet, and we thought, well, if we make it 50 feet, that's that's really what we're trying to see. We're trying to see more entryways, more units, more really more interaction with the public. We don't want people to have to walk 200 or 300 feet to get into the next entrance or next doorway. So we, after talking to the engineer group and the architecture group, we felt a compromise with 75 feet and allow that to be waived out if there's some topographic challenge or some reason why that can't be met. And kind of another interesting topic that was brought up about this was about some larger retail tenants don't want more than one entryway. They want to have one way in, one way out to be able to monitor it, or two ways in at most. So I thought that was a valid point, but those are the kind of things that the planning director would have the flexibility to waive out where needed.
Okay. The third one, while I didn't hear the very beginning of it, he was mentioning this idea of shifting the parapet to 8 foot. And then there's other discussion around the facade, and I didn't catch it. I wonder if you caught the details of that one.
That is I don't think we have that on the slides. That is, let's see. So there is, the current language in the zoning ordinance allows parapets to go beyond the maximum structure height. If the max structure height in urban core is 75 feet, you could have a parapet or some, steeple or some type of architectural detail go 4 feet above that. That's the current language.
Oh, and I think he was saying something about screening things that need to be screened on the roof.
Right. So HVAC and your mechanical stuff that you have on the roof, a parapet can hide that from the street or from other positions on another building. The proposed language increases that from 4 feet to 6 feet, which we feel is an appropriate height to do that screening, accomplish that screening. Okay. What he's talking about with the roof line, well, if the max height is 75 feet, you could have 4 to 6 feet above that, but you could also go down with the building. So I don't think we're of the same opinion that it needs 8 feet to be able to achieve that roof line variation.
Okay.
They just may need to have to lose a little bit of a floor, or work with it essentially.
Okay. And then the final one had to do with the max building length. I thought it was kind of an interesting observation that maybe that came as a result of an unintended consequence of all the student purpose buildings down there. But he said if it became more commercial, more office, that sort of thing, that maybe a longer building would be more appropriate.
Sure. Yeah, we had a lot of discussion about this one. I think we originally started with 200 feet, then we went to 220, then we finally settled on 240. And the rationale behind that is that this was feedback that we got from one of the architecture groups, is that a common construction practice is to use, in steel construction, is to use 30 by 30 foot bays for your tenant spaces essentially. And then you can build your drywall and infill as you go. But for the structural components of it, a 30 by 30 bay was a very common dimension. And so based on that, we went from 200, which got you, I think it was like 6.5 of these bays, to 240, which then would allow a full 8 complete bays, structural bays. So that was the rationale behind going to 240. It was 200 was a little bit too small, but 240 seemed to fit and still, make a logical number of bays, essentially 8 full bays. So that was our kind of rationale behind it. We do want to see a physical separation, or at least the DDRC expressed to us this strong desire to have a physical separation between building mass. So it wasn't, to the DDRC and in our opinion as well, it wasn't sufficient just to have a little bit of a setback going into the building. A full separation between buildings was what was desired.
Okay, thanks. Well, I guess what I'd do is, at this point, I'll put this up to the commission for a motion, because I think we're working on trying to do an amendment. So if I can get a motion, we'll move along with the process.
I'm happy to make a motion for PL 2021-00174 for approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second.
I'll second. Oh,
Okay, and so now let's have a little bit of discussion. I know Ms. Yeager was talking about an amendment, and is there any other further discussion as well? Now, I'd like to first of all thank the staff, the DDRC, the stakeholders that got involved in this. This has been a really well thought through, a lot of effort gone into this, and I think it's a real decent product that's come out in the end here. So thanks everybody for all the effort on this.
So I'll go ahead and put the amendment on the table, because I think we have to vote on it first before we vote on the other. So as it's shown on the screen here, I would like to make an amendment to the parking requirement in the College Edge Overlay District for 1-bedroom units to only be required to provide 1 parking space per unit. And then anything that's over two and over still be required to provide 1.5. Mostly, well, I'll make that amendment.
That's the amendment. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a motion and I have a second by Mr. Lazenby. Okay, and then is there any discussion on this, on the amendment?
I'm happy to clarify my position.
Yeah, well, can you do that? Because I'm kind of, my view would be, I'm kind of hesitant on the amendment from this standpoint that, even though they're a studio or 1-bedroom unit, 2 people can be living in those. 2 people that have cars. So then and then my other side of that story is, personally, I'd like to see less parking downtown and get people out of their cars and, that sort of thing. So I'm a little bit.
And that is one thought in the 1-bedroom units. I mean, I know one of the goals is to encourage the development of 1-bedroom units. And, in the College Edge Overlay in particular, there are a lot of parcels that are very small. That already have studio apartments above them. And at some point, those properties are going to have to be, just because of the age of the buildings, will probably have to be redeveloped. Some of those may not even be able to provide parking on site, which means you're going to have to lease parking. And I just don't think for 1-bedroom units, we need to require an extra half space, for say an 8-unit development that may not need 12 spaces. You could do 2-bedroom units there and still only have the same number of required spaces. So to me, to encourage the development of 1-bedroom units, this to me is an incentive. I don't want to disincentivize anybody, but I would like to create some opportunity where we can. especially with regards to 1-bedroom units in the College Edge overlay district. So
Okay.
that's the thought process behind it. And if
Yeah.
anyone wants to ask me about it, that's great.
Yeah, that helps. Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, the area we're talking about that this involves is a relatively very small area.
Yeah, it's just
And-
COD.
Yeah, totally. It's not a whole lot of parking spaces if you added them all up. And it's also in an area where the city has provided other parking facilities, and there's more parking in those areas now than there ever has been. And it may be, even though there may be a cost to that private parking, it's a whole lot more economical and reasonable to pay that than it is to require the developer to build additional parking space and take up commercial and development areas in that section of town.
And many of those developments still require the residents to lease their parking. So that's why I think we see a lot of empty parking in some of these developments, because those residents are still paying for that parking, even though it's a requirement to provide it.
Right.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, we're voting on the amendment. We have a motion and a second. And I'll say all in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say no. Okay, the motion for the amendment carries, and now we're going to vote on the motion for the zoning ordinance amendment itself, PL 2021-00174. I'd like Amber to do a roll call on this one, please.
All right. Bridges,
Yes.
Chancellor,
Yes.
Jaeger,
Yes.
Lazenby,
You're on mute there, Mac.
No on the vote of the amended motion.
Wait,
okay,
we have already voted on the,
I voted for the amendment. That's done. We're now voting on the amended motion,
right.
and
Sorry.
I'm voting no on the amended motion.
Okay, I didn't hear the first part of it.
thank you. Marshall,
Yes.
McCord,
Yes.
Reese, Nanette,
No.
no, okay, thank you. Wright-Ball,
Yes.
Birmingham.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay,
that motion carries. Okay, so now we're on to item number 5. This will be the Summerhill rezoning. It's PL 2021-00164. It's a recommendation to the City Council for rezoning from DDH to Medium Density Residential District, MDRD. Ms. Kennedy.
Yes, good evening. As you stated, it's a request to rezone 2 lots in the James and Ware subdivision at the corner of Summerhill Road and Harper Avenue from DDH to the MDRD, which is the Medium Density Residential District. These are the 2 lots being requested. It is at the corner of that intersection. The applicant is looking to rezone in order to redevelop the current use, which is a duplex. This area was rezoned from NC5 to DDH during a focus area study due to existing single-family homes in this region.
Can you show the other map that has those,
Zones.
has zone, not there, yeah, that. Okay.
It was rezoned to DDH during the Harper Avenue focus area study because of the existing single-family homes in this region. And visually, we felt like Summerhill Road was a clear boundary line. However, there are some other existing duplexes along this line here. That is why staff is recommending approval of this rezoning and are not considering it spot zoning. We look to identify the other duplex lots in this area. Okay, sorry. Just checking something real quick. We feel that because of those other existing duplexes, it would be in our best interest to revisit and do a larger rezoning in this area, which would include these two lots to that MDRD designation. And be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Let's see, is the applicant here and would like to have anything to say about this?
Yes, the applicant is Joel Funderburk.
Okay, let me turn on his microphone. Mr. Funderburk, if you would like to say something, please turn on your microphone.
Hello, am I on?
You are on, sir.
Okay. By changing to this new zone, it doesn't increase my density of units. It's 2 units on the lot now. I will still have 2 units. It would help increase a little bit of square footage in how I can put the units on the lot. So I'm not trying to build condos or anything. I'm still just going to have 2 units on the lot.
Okay. Okay. All right, well, thank you. You can stand by. We may have some further questions. May not. Okay.
Yeah. Can I need to raise my hand.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You can go ahead, Warren.
I think when Mr. Funberg said that there were only 2 units, there are 2 buildings there, but there are 4 units. Is that correct? 2 duplexes?
That is correct. There's 2 units on each lot.
That's right. So that's a total of 4 units on that lot. Okay, or all 2 lots.
And isn't it correct to say that under DDH and with the size of these lots that's kind of non-compliant now?
That is correct.
So that's kind of why we're trying to get out from under that particular zoning in order to rebuild essentially what he's
We're not trying to, Mr.
No,
Funberg.
he is absolutely, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. All right. So do we have a motion?
Before we make a motion, let me just say, I didn't quite hear what Stephanie said. They did not consider this spot zoning. But if indeed there is a need to study this area, and if indeed we think or anticipate some need for rezoning, then I think the best thing to do is to do the study to determine that, rather than do the study afterwards and realize that maybe we didn't make the right decision. So if we're going to do rezone, it's a convenience rezoning, and it was DDH. It's been DDH for quite some time. So if we're going to change it, I don't have any problems with changing it if we do it in a comprehensive and a proactive, studied way.
Yeah, I think we were talking about that as we had a little bit of a chat about that at Packet. Can
We did.
staff recall because we kind of came to a conclusion that may indeed happen. So can you clarify?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. If we really would like to go back and revisit this portion of the Harbor Avenue focus area study and come to a better determination if indeed we do want to move forward with a city initiated map amendment in this area. So if that would make you guys more comfortable for us to do that beforehand, it may be a good idea to postpone this for the time being while we do that,
Well, I think that
as Warren was saying.
the postponing may not be a appropriate way, because when you postpone, you've got to give a date certain, I would understand. We either have to vote up or down, I think, on this proposal, with the understanding that he could come back in if and when the study's done and we do the rezoning.
I agree with Dr. McCord. If we're going to do it, we ought to follow the logical established process to the way we look at rezoning. But to talk also about postponements is a time certain.
Yeah.
It does not have to be an hour or a date certain. It can be a specific circumstance. Postpone it until after the first meeting, after we do the zoning study or whatever. But that's a long time and unknown now. And I would be more in favor of voting it up or down and stick to the logical process of doing the study before we do the rezoning.
It is a small area. I don't know that it would, entail too much man hours to go out and, survey the area. So I don't know that it would be that far out to go revisit it, but I'll let you guys make that determination.
I agree with moving forward on the vote tonight. And I asked a bunch of questions on Monday about this to Katie. And I feel like she's in the right spot as far as go ahead, like these are going to be the way they are. So what about the rest of the area? If we don't wait a long time and it is easier, like she said, then to move forward with rezoning those few areas that will enter the same issue, then let's move ahead with this and then the next step, in my opinion.
Well, this is Warren again, but if we rezone this property now, we're making some assumptions and so I don't know whether, Nanette, you were talking about voting up or down on this, but yes, move on very rapidly with the study, and then we may include this property in it with any rezoning.
On Monday, I felt like Katie felt pretty sure where it would stop and start based on the studies that she had already looked at when this came forward.
All it takes public hearings and a process, and she may be exactly right, and I presume she probably is, but there's an established way to properly, professionally go about it. Have we had a public hearing?
No, sir. I was gonna like to have that if we don't.
Oh, we should have that.
Yeah, let's have that real quick, and then we will have a little more deliberation. So this requires a public hearing. So I would like to open the public hearing for PL 2020-00164, the Summerhill Rezoning. And I'll open the public hearing at this time. If you'd like to speak, please raise that electronic hand. Okay, seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing and then resume deliberation or have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to deny item 5 on the agenda based on the fact that we need to do a study of the larger area and then take this up as quickly as we can after that's completed.
Second.
Can I clarify Robert's rules real quick? Do we need to make a motion to deny, or do we make a motion to approve and then vote yes or no on it? That may be something.
You can make a motion to deny.
Janet, the latter is correct. You are right.
So we would make, the motion would need to be to approve, and then you either vote yes or no to approve. I just know it gets complicated when we start voting to deny, where people aren't.
Yes,
Yeah,
you're correct.
I don't know what's complicated about it, but
I mean, I think that just follows Robert's Rules of Order.
It does.
I question that Robert's Rules of Order. You can make any motion that you want to make.
yeah.
And you can make it favorably or deny, or make a motion to do anything else. So it doesn't have to be always on the positive side. That's totally not Robert's Rules of Order.
I knew we had mentioned that
Actually,
before, so.
I apologize for jumping in on this, Mac. It is, and that's why the council always has to make a positive motion. Theoretically, the planning commission's been doing this for years, but theoretically, it's supposed to be a motion to move the business to the table at all times with a second. And then if you're in favor of the motion, you vote for it. And if you're not in favor of it, you vote against it. Procedurally, I had been working with Phil to move some changes forward. We just hadn't gone there yet. And Phil and I had a talk about this, I don't know, a month or two ago, Phil. And so if you're not comfortable doing that tonight, that's fine, but it also confuses the city council when you move for denial, because they still have to move for approval, even if they're going to deny it by voting against it. So it gets a little confusing, and that's where we're headed, but it's at the pleasure of the planning commission for tonight, how you want to deal with it. But moving forward, I'm going to be working with Phil and Katie to get that changed.
yeah, and in my understanding of Robert's rules is you can make any motion you want. So I guess maybe there's some education that's gonna need to happen, and that's what we're gonna move forward with.
Yeah,
So,
we're going to get you with, we're putting a parliamentarian on retainer. She just left a major law practice in the state to focus only on being a parliamentarian, and we're bringing her on board with the city on retainer, and we'll put you in a training session with her.
I'll
where she'll
go.
talk
Sign
heavily
me up.
about the fact that we don't do negative motions, but that's okay to continue as you are until we get to this point at the pleasure of the majority of the commission.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion to deny and a second. So let's, is there any further discussion about that? And that's how we'll frame it, and then we'll move forward. Okay, no further discussion. Amber, can you do a roll call? So saying yes means deny.
Yes.
I think we should probably go ahead and change the motion to where it's in line with Robert's rules, so we're not confusing.
We just had a discussion that said we're not quite sure exactly what the Roberts rules say, and I've decided that I'm going to go with a motion that was given, because my view is I believe any motion that you want to put on the table, it can be actionable, and so that's the way we'll head right now.
Yes, sir.
And we'll move from there. Okay, so denying, you would have to vote yes to deny. Correct?
Yes
the way
to
we'll
deny,
head.
correct.
Okay.
Okay. Bridges,
No.
Chancellor,
Yes.
Jaeger,
No.
Lazenby,
Yes.
Marshall,
No.
McCord,
Yes.
Reese,
No.
Reitenbaugh,
Yes.
Birmingham.
Yes.
Yes, okay. That's 5-4.
So a motion is denied,
Correct.
correct? Okay.
No, the motion is approved.
The motion is approved.
Item is denied.
Motion is approved that it's denied. Okay, so now we have a good understanding of why this is hard to wrap our head around, and we will definitely go forward and move on the positive end of the vote. I think that really does clarify.
Yeah, Phil, that is why you don't make negative motions, because it's that confusing.
Yep.
So, and that's why, but understood, and we'll get you guys trained on that moving forward.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Let me get where are we at here? Okay, item number 6, Painter Rezoning, PL 2021-00170. Recommendation to City Council for the rezoning of approximately 33.42 acres from rural to CDD. And we have approved the rezoning, the annexation earlier in the consent agenda. So, Mr. Kipp.
Yes, sir. This is essentially in total, you have 6 applications related to these 2 properties. The annexation requests that were on the consent agenda, you recommended approval for. This first one is, or I guess it's the third one technically, is a request by Harry and Allison Painter. They're represented by Gonzalez Strength and Associates. And the recommendation is, or the request is to rezone 33.47 acres from rural to comprehensive development district. The future land use plan for this property envisions it as interstate commercial, and CDD would be an appropriate zoning district to complement that interstate commercial as it relates to the comprehensive plan. Therefore, staff recommends approval, and I did receive a letter or an email from Mr. Seeger and Mr. Wallace in support of both this rezoning and the next rezoning. Here is an exhibit of the property. This particular rezoning involves just this parcel 1 and does not involve this section of property. And this section is the subsequent rezoning request. Here's an aerial image of the property. It was formerly the Windover Farms manufactured home site, and it is currently essentially undeveloped or vacant at this time. Happy to answer any questions, and I believe Mr. Gonzalez is available as the representative.
Yes, so Mark, if it's Mark Gonzalez, turn on your microphone. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to mention that Scott Ratliff, who's the owner's representative, is standing by too for any owner type call, or owner type issues that you may have, and he might want to speak on behalf of this project. We are going to be the civil engineers of record on the site, so any engineering issues I'm prepared to answer if anybody has any questions.
Okay. Mr. Ratcliffe, I turn on your microphone, so if you want to come off of mute, you can speak if you have anything to say. Oh. Okay. All right, so this requires a public hearing, so we'll go ahead and move on into the public hearing. If anybody would like to speak about this rezoning at this time, please raise your electronic hand. All right, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and then ask the commission for motion, discussion, etc.
Chairman, I move to approve item 6 on the agenda.
Second.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Let me see. Okay, let's just go ahead with a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. Okay, motion carries. On to item number 7. This one's the boat right rezoning. This is PL 2021-00171. This is a recommendation to the city council to rezone from rural, which we approved in the consent agenda, the annexation then, to CDD, Comprehensive Development District. Mr. Kipp.
Sure, the property owner is Mr. Hubert Boatwright, and he's represented by, again, Gonzalez Strength and Associates. As you mentioned, it's a request to rezone 1.76 acres from rural to CDD. Again, the comprehensive plan envisions interstate commercial at this location, and CDD is an appropriate zoning district in accordance with the comp plan. Therefore, staff is recommending approval. And the subject property is this area here. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, this requires a public hearing. So at this time, I will open the public hearing for the boat right rezoning, PL 2021-00171. If you would like to speak on this item, please raise your electronic hand. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Ask for a motion or discussion from the commission.
I'll make a motion to approve agenda item 7 with all staff comments.
Second.
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 Okay, motion in the second. All those in favor, or any discussion, first of all, any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. On to item number 8. Item number 8 is a recommendation to City Council for a conditional use approval for a road service use. And this happens to be a gas station with a convenience store and a car wash. This is PL 2021-00184. Mr. Kipp.
Sir, this is a conditional use request for a road service use, a gasoline/service station and car wash to be located there on the intersection or the northeast corner of Cox Road and US 85. The property owner includes both Harry and Allison Painter and Hubert Boatwright. They're represented by Gonzalez Strength and Associates. This is the proposed site plan that shows a potential subdivision of land, including a lot here and another lot with potentially a public road being built to separate the two lots. There is a right-in, right-out entryway here, as well as access through this proposed public road. There's a contemplated, I believe it's 116 fueling stations or fueling pumps, as well as a car wash, drive-through car wash. This has not gone to DRT yet, but would eventually go to DRT for engineering and planning, among other reviews. It does meet the comp plan's intention for interstate commercial and is considered an appropriate use. Therefore, staff is recommending approval. I did not hear any, just received calls, information, but nothing in support or opposition. And here is an aerial image of the property. Happy to answer any questions.
Yes, and did we receive something from the owners of the property across Cox Road from them? And that they were basically, I just want to make that point for the record, that they were in favor of all this development.
You did. I was under the impression it was for the rezoning, but they may have intended it for all of the development in general.
Yeah, it's related to the Painter property, and basically they're all in favor. So just for the record, I have received a letter from Cooper S. Wallace on that. Okay, so this requires a public hearing, so I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. And if you would like to speak on this, please raise your electronic hand. This is item number 8. Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for a motion, comments from the commission.
Chairman, I move for approval of the PL 2021-00184 Reveille Outpost Gas Station Car Wash.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Do I have any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. On to item number 9. This is the Reveille Outpost Agricultural Support Use. It's PL 2021-00185. And it is a recommendation of the City Council for conditional use approval for agricultural support use. Mr. Kipp.
You tired of me yet?
Not yet. Keep going.
All right. This is as you mentioned, a conditional use request request for an agricultural support use, which includes a tractor supply store, sales, and repair. The subject property is just north of the proposed gas station area. It includes 7,000 square feet for store and sales area and 2,500 square feet for the repair center, as well as outdoor sales area. The proposed use is in line with the comprehensive plan and future land use designation of interstate commercial. Therefore, staff recommends approval. And it would essentially replace an existing use here that's in the county and relocate it and expand it to this area here, just for clarification. Happy to answer any questions on this conditional use request.
Okay, thank you. This requires a public hearing as well. So at this time, I'm going to open the public hearing for PL 2021-185. Reveille Outpost Agricultural Support Use. Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for a motion or comments from the commission.
I've got a question, Mr. Chairman, about, we talked at the packet meeting about that sidewalk. Is it required in this zoning area by the city, or is this something that they want to have because of their business voluntarily?
It is required by the city. Yes.
Chairman, I've moved to approve item number 9 on the agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those, any opposed, say no. I hope that was that an aye, Miss Birmingham? Or
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
you were voting for?
Yes, I voted already.
Okay, sorry, I heard something else from you. Okay, so the motion carries. All right, down to our last item, since we have removed item number 10 from the agenda by request of the applicant. We're going to move to item number 11, which is Summerhill Subdivision, PL 2021-00178. And this is a preliminary plat approval for a performance residential development. Ms. Kennedy.
Yes, so this is prox map showing the location, located at MDRD zoning district, just off Glen Avenue, between Glen and Harper Avenue. You previously saw a conditional use approval for this site last month. They're requesting a preliminary plat approval for a 21 lot performance mixed use residential subdivision. Sorry about that. This is the proposed plat. These 4 corner lots would be the 4 approved ADDU lots from that conditional use approval. These lots facing Harper Avenue are proposed to be townhomes. And these two lots are proposed to be the twin homes. We have not received any information regarding this proposal, and staff is recommending approval.
Okay. Okay, this does require a public hearing, so I'm gonna go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. Would anybody like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and ask for questions, comments, or motion.
I would move to approve PL 2021-00178 Somerville preliminary plat.
Second.
Okay, a
I'll
motion
second.
is second. Is there any discussion? All right, I'd like to have a voice vote. I mean, a roll call, please, on this one.
All right. Bridges,
Yes.
Chancellor,
Yes.
Jaeger,
Yes.
Lazenby,
Yes.
Marshall,
Yes.
McCord,
Yes.
Reese,
Yes.
Reitenbaugh,
Yes.
Birmingham.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries, and that brings us to the end of the regular agenda. There's no other business. I have no communications. Does staff have anything they want to communicate with us?
Just a reminder that we will have our work session on the Highway 280 focus area study, as well as the downtown mural program that Stephanie will be presenting to you. That will be April 27th, and that will be in person.
Oh, okay. At the DSP, or where are we going to do that?
To be determined.
Okay.
But more than likely, it will be the council chambers for this meeting. But I will confirm that in the next couple of weeks.
And so what sort of, are there going to, I know the governor's, decided to pull the mask mandate. Some of the cities still have some of that. What's it look like in the city of Auburn at the council chambers?
So the council chamber still has the plexiglass partitions between each of the seats on the dais.
Okay.
So I think if you guys sit up there and staff sits at the tables in front of the dais, which also have plexiglass separations, there will be, I believe, the capacity of the city council chambers for the public, if they wish to attend, is 24 persons. And should there be additional citizens there, we would have overflow seating in the courtroom.
Okay, is there a mask requirement in the city chambers at this point?
Recommended.
Recommended, okay.
Right.
I do need to clarify though, when court is going on, they're under a different state mandate and the courtroom's now down the hallway. And so there are a lot of signs on the building that have to do with court. So we may put seats closer together. If we increase capacity, masks will be required for people unless they're speaking to you. It's not required for the commission because of the plexiglass. That's at your discretion.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, in that case, we've come to the end of our meeting. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and I call this meeting adjourned.
Good evening, everyone.
All right. See ya. Take care.
Night.
Good night.